Imagine walking through the psychology department at Cornell University today. Among the glass jars filled with preserved specimens, there sits one of the most infamous brains in American history. Floating in formaldehyde, this organ once belonged to a man who could read and write in 8 languages, translate ancient Greek, and even craft new theories about human language itself. By all measures, he should have been celebrated as a brilliant scholar. But here's the twist. This same man also committed brutal murders that terrified 19th-century New York. His name was Edward Howard Rudolph, a man newspapers would later call the genius killer. Tonight, we begin the dark story of how a brilliant scholar transformed into a manipulative predator, how intelligence became his disguise, and how the hunger for knowledge turned into an obsession that justified murder. If you love true crime mixed with dark history, make sure to hit that subscribe button and tap the notification bell. We drop new mysteries every week, and I'd love to know where you're watching from. Comment your state or city below. Now, let's go back to 1842, when a charming stranger first walked into a small New York village, hiding secrets that would soon spill blood. Part 1. The Scholar in Disguise. The Finger Lakes region of New York was booming in the 1840s. The Erie Canal had transformed sleepy farm towns into bustling centers of trade. Churches were packed during the Second Great Awakening, and families dreamed of prosperity through education and hard work. Into this hopeful landscape came a tall, dark-haired young man named Edward Rudolph. At just 23, he was unlike anyone the small town of Dryden had ever seen. He wasn't a rough canal worker. He wasn't a simple farmer. He looked, and spoke, like a man from another world. His clothes were neat and scholarly, his hair carefully groomed, and his sharp dark eyes seemed to look straight into people's souls. When he opened his mouth, the effect was even stronger. Edward could quote Latin poetry with ease, switch to German without hesitation, and then explain complicated ideas in medicine or philosophy that left his listeners in awe. He gave public talks on phrenology, the then popular science of reading character by the shape of the skull, and townsfolk crowded in to listen. To them, it was like having a university professor suddenly appear in their rural community. But beneath that polished surface, Edward carried secrets darker than anyone could imagine. A troubled beginning. Edward's story didn't begin in New York. He was born John Edward Howard Rudolphson around 1819 in New Brunswick, Canada. His father had been a respected Danish immigrant, but after the man's death, the family's fortunes collapsed. Young Edward showed signs of brilliance early. He devoured every book he could find, learning with an intensity that shocked his teachers. But along with knowledge came something else, a taste for deception and crime. By his teenage years, he wasn't just a promising student. He was also a thief and a manipulator. He worked at a dry goods store, but when stock began to disappear, suspicion fell on him. Then came suspicious fires at the store, awesomes that seemed designed to cover his thefts. When Edward was caught wearing clothes that matched the stolen items, he was convicted of embezzlement and spent 2 years in prison. For most young men, prison would have been a humiliation. But Edward treated it like a classroom. He studied, planned, and began imagining a new life for himself. Not as a poor, ordinary Canadian, but as a respected intellectual in the United States. When he walked out of prison, he left behind his old name, Rudolphson, and reinvented himself as simply Edward Rudolph. A respected stranger. By the time he arrived in Dryden, New York, he was ready. He blended into society perfectly, taking a job as a clerk at the local drugstore. His knowledge of plants and medicine impressed his boss and the customers. Soon, people came to him for advice not just on remedies, but on crops, politics, and philosophy. He became the man everyone wanted to be around. Farmers asked his opinion, local leaders consulted him, families invited him to dinner just to hear him talk. And soon, he was offered the most respected role in town, headmaster of the local school. But with this position of respect came opportunity, and temptation. Harriet Shutt. Among Edward's students was 17-year-old Harriet Shutt, daughter of one of the most prominent families in the area. Harriet was strikingly beautiful, tall, slender, with long light brown hair and bright hazel eyes. She was well educated for her time, polite, and carried herself with quiet dignity. For Edward, Harriet was more than just a student. She was a prize. Marrying her would not only tie him to a wealthy, respected family, it would also give him control over someone young, impressionable, and deeply fascinated by his worldliness. To Harriet, Edward seemed like a window into a bigger, more exciting life. He wasn't just a small-town schoolteacher. He was mysterious, well-read, and full of promises about the world beyond the Finger Lakes. But there were red flags from the very beginning. Edward had a jealous streak so intense it frightened people. He could switch from charm to cold, controlled rage in an instant. Harriet's family noticed, but his charisma and reputation as a man of learning made it easy for them to doubt their instincts. On December 31, 1843, Edward and Harriet were married at the Shutt family farm. Snow blanketed the land outside, and the ceremony seemed, at first, like a joyous new beginning. But then, something unsettling happened. When the minister leaned forward to give the bride a traditional congratulatory kiss on the cheek, Edward's face twisted with violent jealousy. His eyes blazed with rage, his jaw clenched, and his whole body stiffened. Guests stepped back in shock. Everyone in that room saw the crack in Edward's mask. But instead of heeding the warning, they dismissed it as nerves. Harriet told herself it was just proof of how passionately he loved her. But it was something far darker. A dangerous union. Their marriage quickly revealed Edward's true nature. He controlled Harriet, isolating her from her family by convincing her to move to a new village, Lansing. He built a reputation as a healer and intellectual there, all while tightening his grip on her life. When Harriet gave birth to their daughter, Priscilla, in 1845, it seemed for a brief moment that fatherhood softened him. He doted on his wife and child, reading to them and speaking of grand futures. But Edward's ambitions were growing. He wasn't content to be a small-town doctor or schoolteacher. He believed he was destined for greatness, to change the very way humans understood language and thought. And soon, when the obstacles to that dream appeared too great, Edward would show just how far he was willing to go to protect his vision. Right finger end of part 1. Edward Ruloff had the town fooled. To everyone else, he was a healer, a scholar, a gentleman. But Harriet and Priscilla were about to discover the monster behind the mask. In part 2, we'll see how Edward's obsession with control, and his belief in his own genius, would lead him down a path of chilling violence. Don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss it. And drop a comment below, do you think the townsfolk should have seen the warning signs at the wedding? Sparkle's word count, approximately 1040, YouTube pacing approximately 12 to 15 minutes spoken narration. Do you want me to continue with part 2, another 1000 words, in the same style, building up to his first murder, or do you want me to outline all 10 parts first so you can see the structure of the full series? Drop of Blood, the Genius Killer, Edward Ruloff, Part 2. Horror crime story for YouTube audience. Clapperboard hook intro. In Part 1, we met Edward Ruloff, the charming scholar who impressed the small towns of New York with his brilliance. To the outside world, he was a healer, a linguist, and a man destined for greatness. But behind closed doors, he was jealous, paranoid, and violent. Tonight, we continue his story, and it takes a darker turn. A family tragedy raises questions about whether Ruloff was a healer at all, or a killer hiding in plain sight. And soon, on one stormy night, his brilliance and rage will explode into one of the most chilling crimes in 19th century America. If you haven't seen Part 1, go check it out. And if you're ready for more, hit subscribe and ring the bell, because this is where the story gets truly horrifying. Part 2. The Night of Blood. After his marriage to young Harriet Shutt, Ruloff kept feeding her dreams of a brighter future. He spoke often of Ohio, the gateway to the West. He told her he'd been offered a position as a professor, a chance to live among scholars instead of gossiping villagers. He painted pictures of lecture halls, fame, and recognition for his genius. To Harriet, who trusted her husband's intelligence, these dreams almost sounded possible. But the reality in their small Lansing home was much darker. A partner and a threat. In Lansing, Edward practiced as a botanical physician, mixing herbs and roots into cures for everything from fevers to infections. But he wasn't alone. He had a partner, Henry Bull, Harriet's cousin. Bull was a real physician. Unlike Edward, he had proper training. And unlike Edward, he had genuine kindness. He was friendly, affectionate, and well liked by the extended Shutt family. He often greeted Harriet with a simple kiss on the cheek, an innocent gesture common in those days among relatives. But to Edward, every one of those kisses was proof of betrayal. His wedding day rage had never left him, and now it grew into full-blown paranoia. Edward became convinced that Harriet and Dr. Bull were having an affair. It didn't matter that they were cousins. It didn't matter that there was no evidence. In Edward's mind, the betrayal was real. He began following Harriet when she left the house, interrogating her about every conversation, accusing her of infidelities that only existed in his twisted imagination. The brilliant scholar who could speak Latin and Greek had become a jealous monster inside his own home. Death in the family. Then, tragedy struck the Shutt family. In May of 1845, Harriet's sister-in-law, the young wife of her brother William, fell terribly ill after giving birth to her second child. Both mother and infant were burning with fever, clearly fighting a deadly infection. Naturally, the family turned to Edward. He was their relative, their doctor, the man with the herbal knowledge to save them. Edward prepared a remedy, mixing herbs with great care. He administered it himself, assuring the family that recovery would come. But within 48 hours, both mother and baby were dead. Now, in the 1840s, death during childbirth was tragically common. People accepted that medicine could only do so much. But whispers began to spread. Why had both patients died so quickly, and after Edward's treatment? Even worse, Edward's behavior shocked the family. He showed no grief, no sympathy. Instead, he made chilling remarks to his mother-in-law, comments about who in the family might go next. They sounded less like sorrow, and more like threats. The Shutt family, who had already harbored doubts about Harriet's husband, now began to actively fear him. Though no one dared say it openly, suspicion hung in the air. Had Edward killed them on purpose? Cracks in the marriage. The deaths created a permanent rift between Edward and the Shutts. Harriet's family no longer trusted him. Edward, in turn, felt persecuted and misunderstood. His answer: Ohio. He begged Harriet to leave her family behind, to join him in the West where he claimed greatness was waiting. He ranted about the small-minded villagers who didn't appreciate him, about how only in Ohio would he finally be recognized. But Harriet refused. She had just buried her sister-in-law and infant niece. She couldn't abandon her grieving family, no matter what Edward promised. That refusal enraged him. To Edward, it wasn't just disobedience. It was betrayal. He became convinced that Harriet's loyalty to her family, and to Dr. Bull, was proof she was conspiring against him. Their arguments grew more violent, more frequent. Harriet was trapped between a brilliant husband the world admired and a private tyrant who accused her of sins she had never committed. June 22, 1845. The final breaking point came on a stormy summer evening. Outside, thunder rolled over Cayuga Lake. Lightning flashed across the dark sky. Inside the Ruloff home, the air was just as heavy, thick with rage and suspicion. Edward had been drinking. That always made him worse. The argument began again. Ohio, betrayal, infidelity. He demanded Harriet pack up and leave her family forever. She refused. She even laughed at his wild accusations, certain he couldn't possibly believe his own words. But he did, and in that moment, something inside Edward Ruloff snapped. Harriet was in the kitchen, crushing peppercorns with a heavy iron pestle. Edward lunged forward, ripped the pestle from her hands, and, in a blind eruption of rage, smashed it against her forehead. The blow landed with sickening force. Harriet collapsed instantly, blood gushing across the kitchen floor. The thunder outside seemed to echo the violence inside. Edward stood over her, staring coldly as life drained from her eyes. There was no sorrow, no regret, only a grim satisfaction. The woman who had defied him would never defy him again. The cry of the innocent. But Edward's crime wasn't finished. From the cradle, little Priscilla, their infant daughter, began to cry. Disturbed by the noise, sensing something terrible, her tiny wails pierced the heavy silence of the room. Edward turned. The baby's cries filled him with a new rage. In his twisted mind, Harriet had betrayed him, and now, even the child seemed like an obstacle. What happened next would remain one of the darkest mysteries of Edward Ruloff's life. Right finger end of part 2. On that stormy night, Edward Ruloff crossed the line from jealousy to murder. But Harriet wasn't the only victim. What he did next with baby Priscilla would horrify the community for years to come, and leave a chilling question: how could a man so brilliant commit such monstrous acts? In part 3, we'll uncover the aftermath of Harriet's death, the disappearance of little Priscilla, and how Edward's lies kept him one step ahead of justice. Bell subscribe so you don't miss it, and drop a comment below. Do you think the Schutts were right to suspect Edward after those accidental deaths? Part 3: The Vanishing. Ruloff agreed to treat the sick mother and her fragile infant with a mixture of botanical powders and tinctures he measured out with cold precision. He spoke gently, as though his hands carried salvation rather than peril, and he lingered by their bedsides with the air of a physician performing noble service. Within 2 days, both mother and child lay dead, their bodies stilled by fever or poison. It was impossible to know. Death was a familiar specter in 1840s rural New York, but its suddenness, its uncanny timing, clung to Ruloff like a shadow. What unsettled the Schutt family most was not the double tragedy itself, but Ruloff's response. While the women of the household wept and the men carried coffins to the churchyard, Ruloff neither grieved nor comforted. He stood aloof, eyes fixed with a strange intensity on his mother-in-law, remarking in an eerily calm voice, "One never knows who will be next." It was a phrase less like sympathy and more like a curse, and the old woman recoiled as though a winter draft had passed through her bones. Whispers spread quickly, as whispers always do in small towns where the walls between houses are made of rumor. Ruloff, the scholar healer, once admired for his intellect, now carried the pall of suspicion. Had he miscalculated his remedy, or had he intended the outcome? Few dared speak the thought aloud, but the glances cast at him when he passed in the street carried the weight of silent accusation. Feeling the tightening noose of mistrust, Ruloff became more determined to leave. He spoke obsessively of Ohio, of new institutions that awaited his genius, of communities that would treat him with the reverence denied him in New York. Yet Harriet would not abandon her grieving family, not in the wake of her sister-in-law's death. Her loyalty enraged him. Every refusal was, in Ruloff's mind, proof that her relatives were poisoning her affections against him. By June, their quarrels had grown violent, their home filled less with scholarly talk than with shouts and slammed doors. Ruloff's jealousy turned rabid. He accused Harriet of secret meetings with her cousin, Bull. He lurked outside windows, trailed her steps to the market, interrogated her with venom about every word exchanged with other men. The man who once charmed her with lectures on philosophy now seemed a thing possessed. And then came the night of June 22, 1844. The day had been thick with heat, the air pressed close and heavy, as though the whole valley around Cayuga Lake were holding its breath. By dusk, thunder rolled low over the water, and lightning split the horizon in jagged forks. Inside the Ruloff home, Harriet stood in the kitchen, grinding peppercorns with a heavy iron pestle. The storm outside mirrored the tempest within. Ruloff had been drinking since supper, pacing and muttering, his accusations swelling with each glass. When Harriet, weary of his paranoia, laughed at his wilder charges, it was the sound that broke him. Something in the mocking lightness of her laughter shattered his fragile restraint. In an instant, he crossed the room and wrenched the pestle from her hands. With a roar drowned only by thunder, he brought it crashing down on her brow. The sound was sickening, a crack like green wood split by an axe. Harriet crumpled to the floor, her blood spreading across the planks in a black pool that gleamed each time lightning flashed. For a long moment, Roloff stood over her, chest heaving, his face twisted in something between fury and triumph. Then silence. It was the infant's cry that stirred him again. Priscilla wailed from her cradle, the high, pitiful sound slicing through the storm and through her father's blackened soul. He turned toward the sound, a flicker of hesitation passing over his features. But hesitation is not mercy. He moved to his shelf of vials and powders, his fingers steady now, as if this act required all the clinical precision of science. He brewed a draught, bitter and dark, and fed it drop by drop to the crying child. The cries weakened, faltered, and at last were gone. By midnight, the storm had passed, but within the Roloff home, there was only the stench of blood, the stillness of two silenced lives, and the quiet satisfaction of a man who believed he had reclaimed control. The next morning, when neighbors called, they found Roloff alone. His explanations were strange, shifting with each retelling. Harriet and Priscilla, he said, had gone to visit relatives. First, he named a cottage between Cayuga and Seneca Lakes. Later, he insisted they had gone to Erie, Pennsylvania. Within days, his story changed again. Harriet and the baby had relocated to Ohio, preparing a new home for them all. But the house betrayed him. Harriet's traveling basket remained on her bureau. Her jewelry lay untouched. Her dresses hung in the wardrobe. She had not packed. She had not gone willingly anywhere. And those who had known her all her life understood at once that she would never have vanished without word to her family. Roloff even penned a letter, florid in style, addressed to his absent wife, asking her to contact her mother. Weeks passed. No reply came. The silence was louder than thunder. Suspicion hardened into certainty among the Schutts. Harriet's brothers, William and Ephraim, took up the grim duty of hunters. They questioned neighbors, gathered rumors, pieced together movements. And piece by piece, a darker picture emerged. Witnesses recalled Roloff, pale and furtive, borrowing a wagon the morning after his wife's disappearance. They had seen him load a large chest, heavy, cumbersome, its contents concealed beneath cloth. He had driven toward Cayuga Lake. He had returned alone. The brothers pressed harder. Roloff, cornered by mounting suspicion, fled in the night, claiming he would reunite with his family in Ohio and bring them back. His flight was his confession. But Ephraim would not let him slip away so easily. Grief lent him a relentless courage, and he pursued Roloff across counties, through villages and stations. He tracked him to Rochester, where the fugitive sought passage westward. In the crush of travelers at the train platform, Ephraim found him lurking at the edge of the crowd. Their eyes met, and in that moment each man understood the other, the hunter and the hunted, bound together by the shadow of Harriet's blood. Roloff, ever the actor, feigned delight at the meeting. With a boldness that bordered on madness, he invited Ephraim to travel with him, insisting Harriet awaited them in Ohio. And so the two men rode together, tension coiled between them like a drawn blade. They spent a night in Buffalo, Roloff speaking calmly of plans and destinations, Ephraim watching with the cold vigilance of a predator. By dawn, at the bustling docks, Roloff made his escape. He vanished into the throng, into the smoke of steamships and the cries of deckhands, leaving Ephraim grasping only empty air. Back in Lansing, the search began in earnest. Cayuga Lake became the graveyard everyone suspected but could not prove. Men dragged its depths with crude hooks and nets, their faces set with grim determination. Lantern light bobbed across the black surface at night, like will-o'-the-wisps marking the place of the dead. But the lake, vast and cold, kept its secrets. No body rose, no cradle drifted ashore. Harriet and Priscilla had been swallowed whole. Still, the town whispered. In the shadows of barns, in pews on Sunday mornings, in the hush of kitchens after dark, the tale spread, Roloff had murdered them both. And Cayuga Lake itself seemed cursed thereafter, its still waters reflecting not just sky and trees, but the silence of two lost souls, imprisoned beneath. What lingered most was not the crime, but Roloff's strange demeanor. In the weeks after, some swore they saw him weep like a bereaved husband, wringing his hands in despair. Others recalled him whistling cheerfully on his walks, as though liberated from burden. To each neighbor he offered a different face, as though trying on masks until he found the one that would fit. But no mask could conceal the truth. The roll-off house stood hollow, a shell filled with echoes, the faint cry of a baby, the crack of iron on bone, the laughter of a wife silenced forever. The community, though powerless to recover the bodies, had no doubt of what had transpired. And the horror of it spread outward, carried by rumor, by story, by warning. Edward Roloff had crossed the threshold from man to monster. And though the waters of Cayuga concealed the evidence, they could not drown the memory. Would you like me to push part 3 further into gothic horror, with supernatural undertones, e.g., the lake becoming haunted, villagers reporting strange lights and cries at night, or keep it strictly historical horror rooted in Roloff's psychological descent? Part 4: The Curse of the Lake. For weeks after Roloff's disappearance into the smoky chaos of Buffalo's docks, the town of Lansing throbbed with unease. Life continued, plows turned the soil, markets bustled, sermons echoed in church rafters, but an unspoken pall lay heavy across the valley. No one could pass Cayuga Lake without feeling its eyes upon them, cold and ancient, as though it had become the conspirator in Roloff's crime. The Schuts searched still. Day after day, they dragged the black waters with iron hooks tied to ropes, their lanterns bobbing like corpse candles across the waves. At dawn, they returned empty-handed, their faces carved with grief and exhaustion. Harriet and Priscilla remained lost, swallowed by the endless, shifting depths. Children were forbidden to linger near the lake, though some swore they heard a woman's cry drifting across the water at dusk, or the faint whimper of an infant just before storms broke. The elders warned, "Do not listen long. Those cries are not meant for the living." Fishermen refused certain coves altogether, declaring their nets came up tangled with weeds that writhed like fingers, pulling them down. The Roloff house, abandoned, became another wound upon the land. Its windows gaped like sockets, its doors sagged upon its hinges, and at night, strange lights flickered within. Some claimed they saw a pale woman at the upstairs window, her face half smashed, her gown soaked in blood. Others heard the hollow lull of a cradle rocking though the house was empty. But Roloff himself, living flesh, cunning mind, remained at large. Rumors trickled east and west. A scholar of his ambition could not vanish without trace, and yet he eluded justice like a fox eludes the hound. The hunter, Ephraim Schutt, could not rest. Each night he dreamed of his sister's face, eyes wide with terror, her hands outstretched toward him, always just beyond reach. He woke drenched in sweat, the phantom cries of Priscilla still echoing in his ears. By day, he hunted. He carried Roloff's description to taverns and train stations, to the boarding houses of Rochester and the crowded streets of Buffalo. Some swore they had seen him, always fleeting, always a step ahead. In Ohio, a man matching his likeness had given lectures on philosophy. In Pennsylvania, a traveler of his bearing had boarded a night train, vanishing into its smoke. The more Ephraim searched, the more Roloff seemed to dissolve into myth. It was as if the murderer had learned to shed identities like serpents shed skin, leaving only unease behind. But Ephraim pressed on. "I will not rest until he is dragged to the gallows," he told William, his voice a vow carved in stone. The Schutts, once farmers and neighbors, had become avenging furies, their grief honed into something merciless. Roloff's wanderings. Roloff himself, though hunted, did not wander aimlessly. Those who encountered him later spoke of a man who seemed at once brilliant and broken. His speech veered between eloquent discourse and muttered paranoia. He lectured on natural philosophy in one town, then vanished in the night. He offered remedies in another, only to be chased out when suspicion followed him like a shadow. He carried notebooks filled with strange diagrams, half scientific, half occult. Some pages detailed tinctures and chemical formulas. Others bore symbols that villagers whispered were signs of witchcraft. Roloff seemed less a physician than an alchemist lost in his own labyrinth of obsession. Yet always, behind the intellect, lurked the predator. He trusted no one. He changed his name with each stop. And though he was hunted, there was a gleam in his eye, a glimmer that suggested he believed himself chosen, untouchable, as if even God himself had no jurisdiction over him. The lake's hunger. Back in Lansing, Cayuga Lake grew into legend. Stories multiplied as if the water itself spawned them. A farmer returning late swore he saw a woman drifting along the shore, her long hair clotted with weeds, her arms cradling a child of water and shadow. When he called out, both vanished in a ripple. A fisherman, drunk in the tavern, claimed he heard lullabies echoing from beneath the surface, voices muffled by depth. He leaned too close, he said, and felt hands brush his ankles from below. Even the clergy, who scorned superstition, began to falter. Reverend Childs confessed during one sermon that the lake keeps more than water within it. It keeps wrath, and it will not be stilled until justice walks this earth. The congregation sat in silence, shivering though the summer heat pressed upon them. The people of Lansing came to believe Cayuga had become cursed by Roloff's sin. The waters were no longer mere waters. They were a grave, a witness, and perhaps a mouth that hungered for more. A glimpse in the night. One autumn evening, Ephraim returned from another fruitless hunt, his boots caked in mud, his eyes hollow. Unable to sleep, he walked to the lake's edge. The moon hung high, casting a pale path across the water. And there, between the reeds, he saw it. A cradle, half rotted, bobbing gently with the tide. Within it lay not an infant, but a bundle of rags, soaked and black with decay. He waded into the water, heart hammering, until the cradle dissolved beneath his hands, vanishing like smoke. Whether it was vision, dream, or madness, Ephraim could not say. But from that night forward, he believed Harriet and Priscilla were still there, calling to him, bound to the lake until Roloff was caught. Roloff returns. Years later, Roloff dared to return east. He believed time had dulled suspicion, that the world had forgotten. But the world had not. The Schuts had not. Lansing had not. His reappearance would reignite the old fury, drawing hunters, lawmen, and neighbors into a new web of suspicion and pursuit. The lake waited still, patient, reflecting the stars upon its surface, hiding its dead in silence. And when Roloff's fate finally came, whether by rope, by exile, or by madness, the whispers promised one thing: Cayuga Lake would not give up its secrets, for the lake itself had become Roloff's accomplice, his altar, his abyss. The story of Harriet and Priscilla no longer belonged to one family. It belonged to the land. It belonged to the water. And the people of Lansing carried it with them always, an inheritance of horror, a curse that stained every ripple, every storm, every echo across Cayuga's dark expanse. Coffin end of part 4. Do you want part 5 to lean harder into Roloff's pursuit and capture, historical horror, or should I thread in more supernatural elements, like the murdered mother and child haunting him across his travels? Part 5: The Haunting of Roloff. The years stretched on, and with them, the hunt for Dr. Henry Roloff grew into a tale told across counties. In Lansing, he was remembered as a monster in flesh. In distant towns, he became a phantom fugitive, a man spoken of in whispers, always said to be just one step ahead of the noose. Yet Roloff was no mere wanderer. His mind, brilliant yet diseased, kept him forever restless. He shifted names like a thief changes coats. In one village he posed as a lecturer on medicine, in another a tutor of languages. He bartered his intellect for coins, then vanished before suspicion caught hold. But though his steps were many, he carried something with him that no disguise could conceal. The weight of the lake. The first signs. Roloff began to notice it during the second winter after Harriet and Priscilla had been drowned. In a boarding house near Erie, he awoke to the sound of weeping. At first, he thought it was the landlady, mourning her husband recently buried. But when he crept to the hall, the sound grew clearer, thin, high, and aching. It was a child. The sobs drifted from his room, though the bed beside him lay empty. His lamp sputtered, casting shadows that stretched too long across the walls. The weeping grew louder until he tore open his trunk in desperation, as though the sound might be hidden among his books. When he turned, the cradle was there. Old, warped by damp, its wood swollen with rot. Inside, a bundle of rags twitched as if something beneath them stirred. Roloff staggered back, bile rising in his throat. Then, in a single blink, it was gone. Only the bare floor remained, though the sound of sobbing lingered in his ears until dawn. Dreams of water. From then on, Roloff was never free. At night, he dreamed of Cayuga Lake. Its waters black and endless, its reeds whispering secrets he could not escape. He saw Harriet's face, her mouth opening to scream though only bubbles burst forth. He saw the child sink, her tiny arms thrashing before stillness claimed her. Sometimes he dreamed he stood at the shore, and the water rippled outward to meet him, forming pale hands that beckoned him in. Other nights, he was beneath the surface, lungs burning, weeds binding him tight. And always, just before waking, he heard it, a lullaby. Harriet's voice, soft and cracked, singing to the daughter he had murdered. Shadows on the road. By the fourth year, Roloff had become a shell of the man who once lectured with such fire. His eyes darted at every shadow. He flinched when children laughed, mistaking their voices for the wails of Priscilla. He took to traveling only at night, hunched against the dark, muttering to himself like a beggar. In the town of Meadville, he was seen speaking to an empty rocking chair on the porch of his rented room. A neighbor swore he was cradling something invisible in his arms, whispering lullabies in a voice that cracked with sorrow. When confronted, Roloff flew into a rage, cursing that the child would not be silenced. The landlady threw him out by lantern light, claiming afterward she found her floors soaked in water though no pitcher had been overturned. The Schuts, bow. Meanwhile, Ephraim and William Schutt had not abandoned the hunt. Though the years hardened them, their resolve never dimmed. Ephraim, gaunt and gray before his time, swore to every man he met that Roloff still walked among them. "He is cursed," Ephraim told the sheriff of Geneva. "He cannot die till justice claims him. But until then, the earth itself will hound him." In Lansing, children grew up on their story. Parents warned them that if they misbehaved, Roloff will take you to the lake. His name had become both curse and legend, a specter woven into every gust of wind that rattled the reeds. The return of the Cradle. One storm-swept evening, Roloff lodged in a cheap inn near Pittsburgh. Thunder shook the rafters, rain lashed against the shutters. He lit a candle and bent over his journal, scrawling feverishly as if knowledge itself could shield him from the voices. His notes spiraled between science and madness, diagrams of human lungs beside sketches of waves swallowing figures whole, formulas for medicines alongside strange sigils he claimed would quiet the drowned. The Cradle returned. This time, it did not vanish when he blinked. It sat squarely in the corner, rocking slowly though no breeze stirred the air. Water dripped from its edges, pooling dark upon the floorboards. Roloff froze, quill trembling in his hand. The bundle of rags shifted, and from within came the thin mewl of an infant. The cry rose higher, piercing, echoing off the walls until his ears rang. "Silence!" he roared, leaping forward. He seized the cradle, overturning it in fury. The rags spilled onto the floor, and with them, water gushed as if a basin had been overturned. It soaked his boots, hissed against the candle flame, and left the room reeking of rot. The cradle was gone, but when Roloff collapsed back into his chair, chest heaving, he felt the floorboards groan. Slowly, a damp hand brushed his ankle. He screamed until his voice broke. A madman wandering. From that night, Roloff was no longer merely a fugitive. He had become a madman. Travelers spoke of a gaunt figure seen wandering roadsides, muttering of lakes and infants, clutching a bundle of rags as if it were precious. Some pitied him, offering bread. Others fled, declaring him possessed. He sought work but found none. He gave lectures to empty halls, shouting at shadows, his once brilliant rhetoric dissolved into incoherent fragments. His journals grew unreadable, the ink blotched with damp as though the very pages had soaked in lakewater. And wherever he went, storms seemed to follow. The omen at the river. The final tale of Roloff before his trail dissolved once more came from a ferryman along the Allegheny River. He swore a wild-eyed man boarded his skiff at dusk, clutching what looked like a cradle swaddled in cloth. The ferryman rowed silently, unnerved by the muttering that poured from his passenger's lips. Halfway across, the man stood, staring into the black waters. "Do you hear them?" he whispered. "They sing for me. Before the ferryman could stop him, Roloff dropped the cradle into the river. It did not sink. Instead, it floated, rocking gently, drifting downstream until the darkness swallowed it. Roloff wept like a child. When the boat reached the opposite bank, he fled into the trees, never to be seen again in those parts. The curse deepens. In Lansing, the Schuts never reclaimed the bodies. Cayuga Lake held them still, its waters swallowing justice along with the dead. But word of Roloff's hauntings trickled back, tales of the cradle, the cries, the storms that followed him. And so the people said, "It is not the law that hunts him. It is the mother and child. Wherever he runs, he carries their grave within him. He will never escape." Roloff was no longer merely a murderer. He had become something worse, prey of his own sins, a man stalked not by the noose but by the eternal reach of the drowned. And Cayuga Lake, silent and black, seemed almost to smile. Coffin. End of part 5. Do you want part 6 1000 words to push more toward Roloff's eventual capture and death, historical horror, or should I hide in the supernatural haunting so it becomes clear that no human punishment could ever surpass what the lake inflicts on him? Part 6. The drowned that walk with him. The Allegheny River was the last time anyone saw Roloff with his burden, the phantom cradle he dragged through his fevered wanderings. After that, the stories grew stranger, fragmented, carried like whispers on the wind. No lawman caught him. No cell enclosed him. Instead, Roloff seemed to dissolve into shadow, his name carried not on warrants but on shuttered tongues. But those who encountered him spoke of one thing in common. He was never alone. The inn at Lock Haven. One tale came from a weary innkeeper in Lock Haven. A storm had driven in a lone traveler, gaunt, bearded, his eyes hollow as though sleep had abandoned him years ago. He gave his name as Dr. Henley, but the innkeeper's wife swore she heard him muttering another in his sleep, Roloff. That night, the inn filled with strange sounds. A door opened by itself. The rafters dripped though the roof held firm. Most chilling of all was the laughter of a child, drifting from the guest's room though no child had lodged there. The innkeeper, desperate to keep order, peered through the keyhole. What he saw made him flee into the rain. The traveler sat in a chair, cradling something in his arms. His head bent low, his lips pressed to an unseen brow as he rocked gently, whispering lullabies in a tongue broken by sobs. Behind him stood a woman, pale, dripping, her eyes blank and glassy. Water streamed down her dress, pooling across the floor though it vanished before reaching the doorway. The innkeeper never spoke of it again without crossing himself. He was not alone, he told his grandchildren years later. 2 others walked with him. And they were not of this earth. The pursuit of the Schuts. Meanwhile, Ephraim and William Schutt aged into hard men, their grief curdling into obsession. They followed rumor to rumor, wasting coin and strength, yet never catching their quarry. One winter in Pennsylvania, they swore they came within hours of him. A tavern maid told of a ragged scholar who left at dawn, raving about voices in the water. The Schuts pursued, but when they reached the next town, the trail turned cold. William spat into the snow. "We are too slow," but Ephraim only shook his head. His eyes, ringed with sleeplessness, gleamed with a dreadful conviction. "We need not hasten," he said. "He is being hunted still, just not by us." The madness deepens. Roloff's journals, those few salvaged after his wanderings, revealed the collapse of his once razor-sharp mind. Greater than the water speaks. It follows. No matter the land, no matter the roof, I hear it whisper. It says her name. It says mine. It says, Father. Greater than I burn sage. I scrawl signs upon my walls. Yet the cradle rocks still. She sings to it. She sings to me. If I answer, perhaps she will forgive. If I sing back, perhaps she will let me sleep. Greater than but the child cries. The child never stops crying. The handwriting grew jagged, the ink blurred as if each page had been soaked. Some claimed the journals themselves wept with lakewater, their edges forever damp. The doctor in the woods. Another legend told of hunters in the forests of western Pennsylvania who stumbled upon a strange camp. A lean man in ragged clothes had built a crude shelter of branches and was muttering to unseen companions. The hunters, curious, watched from the trees. They swore he was speaking to a woman who was not there, holding her hand, kissing the air as though it were lips. Then he turned and scolded an infant only he could see, begging it to stop its screaming. When the hunters stepped forward, the figure whirled, eyes wild. He hissed at them like an animal, brandishing a rusted scalpel. "You will not take them," he shrieked. "They are mine." The hunters fled, shaken. They never returned to that part of the woods. The night at Susquehanna. Years later, near the Susquehanna River, a ferryman told of ferrying Roloff across at dusk. The man was silent, shivering, clutching an empty bundle as if it contained treasure. Halfway across, the ferryman heard another sound, the faint splash of a second boat. But when he turned, he saw nothing but rippling water. Roloff's lips moved as if in conversation. He whispered, "Yes, Harriet, soon we shall be home." Then, louder, to the river itself, "I will come when I am bid. Only grant me one more dawn." The ferryman swore the water darkened around them, as if shadows beneath the surface pressed upward. When they reached the far bank, Roloff leapt ashore and vanished among the trees. The ferryman never took passengers after sundown again. The return of the cradle. The cradle was the final torment. Wherever Roloff slept, it appeared. In barns, in churchyards, in the filth of roadside ditches. Sometimes it rocked gently, lulling him with its steady creak. Other nights it shook violently, spilling water that drenched his body though he awoke in dry straw. Once, in delirium, Roloff seized the phantom child and hurled it into the fire. The flames hissed, roaring high, and then guttered out, leaving the room stinking of rot. From the darkness came the sound of choking, gurgling water. And the lullaby began anew. He crawled into the night on his hands and knees, sobbing, whispering for forgiveness that never came. The gathering storm. By the 7th year of his flight, Roloff was scarcely human. Witnesses described him as a specter himself, cheeks sunken, beard matted, eyes wild with sleeplessness. He no longer begged for food but for silence. "Can you not hear her?" he would ask strangers. "She sings beneath the floor. She waits for me in the river." Those who mocked him suffered strange misfortunes. A boy who jeered that Roloff was father to fish, drowned in the mill pond 2 days later. A farmer who threatened him awoke to find his cattle dead, their hoofs sunk deep in mud though the ground had been dry. People began to believe that Roloff carried the curse of Cayuga Lake with him, dragging its waters into every town he entered. The final vanishing. The last tale placed him near the Ohio border. A preacher's wife swore he staggered into their church during a storm, soaked though the sky above was clear. He clutched the cradle, dripping, and laid it before the altar. "She has forgiven me," he declared in a cracked voice. "The lake has called me home. I go to them now." Then, before anyone could move, he walked out into the rainless night. The next morning, the cradle remained at the altar. It was empty, yet the wood was waterlogged, dripping steadily onto the church floor. Roloff was never seen again. The legacy. The Schutts never found him. Their quest ended not with vengeance but with silence. But in Lansing, people said justice had been done, not by rope, but by the drowned. Cayuga took him back, the elders whispered. The lake swallows what belongs to it. Harriet and the child wait beneath, and now Roloff waits with them. And still, on certain nights when the fog clings to the shore, villagers claim they hear it. The creak of a cradle, the lullaby of a mother long dead, and the faint sob of a man begging forgiveness that will never be granted. Coffin end of part 6. Do you want part 7, 1000 words, to keep spiraling deeper into his cursed fate haunting, ghostly reappearances, or to start building toward a final reckoning, return to Cayuga Lake, where the horror culminates? Part 7 whispers beneath the water. For years after Roloff's vanishing, the story should have ended. The man was gone, swallowed by river or forest, erased by madness and guilt. But horror has a way of refusing burial. The doctor of the cradle, as he was called now, was not finished. The cradle that would not burn. In the church where he left it, the waterlogged cradle was locked away in the vestry. The preacher, a sober man who believed more in discipline than in devils, insisted it be destroyed. One afternoon, with the townsfolk gathered, he dragged the cradle outside. It was small, no more than an infant's bed of pine boards, warped and rotting from damp. "We give back to the earth what should not linger," he declared, and cast it into a bonfire. The crowd watched as smoke coiled upward. The fire crackled, snapping through branches and brush. Yet the cradle only hissed, steaming as though it were freshly pulled from the lake. The flames blackened the wood but did not consume it. Then came a sound, a thin, reedy wail. The crowd froze. It was the cry of a baby, faint at first, then louder, shrill enough to pierce the marrow. Mothers clutched their own children close, men stumbled back. The preacher stood firm, though his hands trembled. He stoked the fire higher, roaring for God's strength. But the cradle did not burn. At last, with the smell of rot and wet moss thick in the air, the preacher collapsed to his knees, sobbing. The cradle lay in the ashes, charred but whole, rocking gently on its own. That night it was locked in the cellar of the church. No one dared touch it again. The Shuts, last hunt. Ephraim and William Shutt heard the tale, and though their quarry was gone, vengeance still burned in them. They rode to the town, demanding to see the cursed object. Against warnings, they descended into the cellar with lanterns. The cradle waited in the shadows. Dampness clung to the stone floor though no spring ran there. The brothers circled it warily, whispering, "It's his mark," William spat. "If we can smash it, we free her spirit." But Ephraim was less certain. His grief had long since curdled into obsession. What if it is her? What if she clings to it still? Their quarrel rose until the lantern sputtered. The flame guttered though no wind stirred. Then came the sound, rocking, creaking, though neither brother touched the cradle. And over it, a lullaby. They knew that song, Harriet's song. The lantern fell, shattering. Darkness swallowed them, and in that blackness William swore he felt small fingers clutch his own. Cold, damp, desperate. He screamed, flailing, striking the cradle. The wood splintered beneath his blows. The sound that followed was no child's cry. It was a woman's shriek, long and terrible, echoing as though from beneath 100 feet of water. When the townsfolk rushed down, they found only Ephraim, white-haired though still young, rocking in the corner, whispering, she took him back." William Shutt was never seen again. The lure of the lake. Word spread. Farmers, trappers, and travelers alike whispered that the cradle carried the drowned within it, a doorway between the living and the dead. And wherever the cradle appeared, misfortune followed. A miller who mocked the story found his wheel jammed, the stream running backward as though pulled toward Cayuga. A child who dared sit in the cradle vanished from her bed the next night, her footprints leading straight to the riverbank and ending at the water's edge. Some claimed Roloff himself returned at times, wandering the shore. Not in flesh, but as a figure half seen in mist, a gaunt man clutching something in his arms, weeping, begging. Unseen voices for mercy. Dogs howled when he passed, and fishers swore their nets came up filled with bones. The cradle was buried, locked, hidden, but it never stayed gone. Wherever it was discarded, it found its way back to the church in Susquehanna. Always dripping, always rocking. Testimony of the ferryman's son. Years later, the ferryman's son, grown old, told his children of a night unlike any other. The fog lay thick over the river, and he heard singing. A woman's voice, soft, mournful. He followed it down to the bank and there saw Roloff, pale as moonlight, standing ankle-deep in the water. Beside him stood Harriet, her gown floating about her as though she were submerged though she stood upon the earth. In her arms she held the child, quiet now, eyes black as river stones. Roloff reached out to the boy. Harriet turned, and in that moment her face split into a smile both tender and cruel. She placed the infant in his arms. The ferryman's son swore Roloff sank instantly, vanishing beneath the ripples though the water was scarcely knee-deep. Harriet and the child followed, their forms dissolving into mist. When the fog cleared, the river was still. But on the shore lay the cradle, dripping lakewater. The curse grows. By the turn of the century, Roloff had become a ghost story whispered to frighten children. They called him the Doctor of the Cradle. Parents warned that if a child wandered too near Cayuga Lake at dusk, Roloff would come, begging to rock them to sleep, and if they let him, they would never wake again. Yet the older folk spoke with more fear than jest. They said the lake was no longer a place of simple drowning. It was a threshold. Those who sank in it did not merely die, they joined. And on misty nights, the drowned walked again. Fishermen swore they saw figures standing on the surface of the water. Lovers by the shore heard lullabies drifting from the reeds. Once, a whole funeral procession halted when the horses refused to cross a bridge. Beneath them, in the black water, a cradle floated against the current, rocking though no hand touched it. The cradle returns to Lansing. 50 years after Roloff's crime, the cradle found its way home. One stormy night, the church in Susquehanna was struck by lightning. When the smoke cleared, the cellar was destroyed, and the cradle gone. Days later, farmers near Lansing discovered it upon the very doorstep of the shut homestead. Old Ephraim, long widowed and half mad, emerged at dawn to find it rocking gently, dripping though no rain had fallen. He fell to his knees, wailing Harriet's name, begging forgiveness. The cradle remained there until Ephraim died, clutching it in his arms. When his kin pried it free, they swore his corpse was waterlogged, lungs brimming with black river silt. The cradle was placed in the barn. By morning, it was gone. Legacy of the drowned. So the story of Dr. Roloff did not end with his vanishing. It grew, fed by whispers and sightings, woven into the bones of Cayuga country. They said the cradle roams still. That Roloff wanders with it, forever searching for peace, forever bound to the wife and child he betrayed. And those who see him must not answer when he speaks, nor take the hand he offers, no matter how pitiful his sobs. For to touch him is to be pulled beneath, into the black embrace of Cayuga's depths. The drowned wait there, and they are never alone. Coffin end of part 7. Do you want part 8 1000 words to keep expanding the folklore, villagers cursed, cradle moving across generations, or to begin building toward the final climax, where Roloff's ghost and the cradle return for a last reckoning at Cayuga Lake? Great, here's part 8, approximately 1000 words, of the horror saga. This part expands the folklore and pulls the curse deeper into the fabric of Cayuga, showing how Roloff's cradle becomes an object of terror and fascination across generations. Part 8, the pilgrimage of the cradle. The generations that followed thought themselves wiser than their forebears. Science was rising, superstition fading. Yet the story of Roloff lingered like a fever in the blood, handed down with hushed voices around firesides, whispered between children daring each other to run to the water's edge at dusk. But the cradle, oh, the cradle was no mere tale. It had a way of returning. The collector. In 1883, a traveling antiquarian came to Cayuga country. His name was Hiram Veck, a gaunt man with spectacles thick as bottle glass and an insatiable appetite for curiosities. He heard whispers in taverns of the cradle that would not burn and dismissed it as rustic superstition. Still, he offered coin to anyone who could show him proof. One farmer claimed to know where it had last appeared, deep in the hayloft of the shut barn. Veck insisted on seeing it. Against protests, the farmer led him there at dusk. They climbed the ladder, and there it was. The cradle rested in the straw, soaked through though the air was dry. Dark water cooled beneath its legs. It rocked with a slow, deliberate rhythm. Veck's eyes shone with greed. A relic, he muttered. A symbol of grief and guilt, nothing more. He laid hands upon it. The farmer swore later that when Veck lifted it, the weight was far too great for such a small thing. He staggered, bent nearly double, as if he carried a coffin instead of a cradle. Yet he would not let it go. That night Veck departed, cradle lashed to his wagon. He was never seen again. Days later, his horses were found wandering along the Seneca Turnpike, reins dragging in the dust. The wagon sat abandoned by the roadside, empty, save for the cradle, damp with fresh river weeds. The college experiment. By the early 1900s, Cornell scholars grew curious. Folklore students, hearing the tales, sought to prove or disprove them. In 1911, 3 young men hauled the cradle into a lecture hall for demonstration. They placed it at the front of the room, where it dripped steadily onto the polished floorboards though no snow nor rain had touched it. One student laughed and climbed into it. "Rock me, mother," he jeered. His companions pushed the cradle, and it swayed violently, creaking. Then the air chilled. The lamps flickered though there was no draft. From the cradle came a sound none could mistake. A lullaby, low and mournful, sung in a woman's voice. The student within went rigid, eyes wide. He opened his mouth to scream, but only bubbles spilled forth, as though he were drowning. He clawed at his throat, convulsing. His friends dragged him out, but his lungs gurgled with water. He survived, though his mind did not. From that night until his death, he babbled only a single phrase, "She rocks me still." The cradle was expelled from the college. No one dared touch it again. By dawn, it was gone. The children of Ludlow Road. In 1929, the cradle surfaced once more, this time in Lansing itself. A group of children, playing hide and seek near the shut homestead ruins, discovered it half buried in leaves. Thinking it a toy, they dragged it into the open. That night, every child who touched it dreamt the same dream. They lay upon cold water, rocked gently, while a pale woman leaned over them, humming. Her hands were soft but dripping, her hair fanned wide like dark weeds. And behind her loomed a gaunt figure, sobbing, whispering prayers. When morning came, one child did not wake. She lay as if asleep, lips blue, chest still. The cradle was gone. The surviving children never spoke of it again. But as old men, and women, they shivered whenever they heard a lullaby sung. The pilgrimage begins. By mid-century, the story spread beyond Cayuga. Writers of ghost tales, spiritualists, and thrill-seekers came in search of Roloff's cradle. They called it the drowned bed or the rocking coffin. Some sought it for fame, others for proof, still others to harness whatever power lay within. None succeeded. The cradle appeared only when it willed, and always at a cost. One group of spiritualists claimed to have summoned it during a séance. They said it materialized in the center of the room, dripping lakewater onto their carpets. When the medium placed her hands upon it, her eyes rolled back and she spoke in 2 voices, one the high wail of an infant, the other the ragged sobs of a broken man. The cradle was found the next morning in the street outside, blocking traffic. The medium was gone. The ferryman's grandson. The ferryman's line endured. His grandson, Elias, lived long enough to tell his tale in the 1950s. He swore the cradle was not merely cursed wood but a vessel. It carries them still, he told his children. Not only Roloff and his Harriet, but all who drowned unjust. They rocked together in that bed, waiting for the living to lay down beside them. When asked why the cradle never stayed buried, Elias only shook his head. "Because grief don't die," he whispered. "And neither does guilt." He begged his kin never to seek it. "If it comes, do not touch it. Do not look inside, for if you see what lies within, it will see you too." Elias died with his eyes open, staring toward the lake. On the night of his burial, neighbors swore they heard a lullaby drifting across the water. The rocking in the storm. In 1966, a violent storm lashed Cayuga. Waves crashed against the shore, trees snapped like twigs. Amid the thunder and lightning, a Lansing farmer reported seeing a cradle float across his flooded field, upstream, against the surge. It struck the side of his barn and rocked there, steady as though on calm waters. With each sway came a sound, not of creaking wood but of voices, dozens, crying, singing, moaning. The farmer fled. By morning, the cradle was gone, but deep gouges marked the barn wall where it had struck. The marks were shaped like hands. The curse settles. By the dawn of the 21st century, Roloff's cradle had become more legend than object. Students dared each other to call his name 3 times at the lake's edge. Campfire stories told of children lured by lullabies. A few believers still claimed the cradle traveled the countryside, appearing at lonely crossroads or in barns on stormy nights. But to those who lived nearest Cayuga, it was no game. They still left offerings by the shore, bread, milk, tiny carved cradles of wood. Away, they said, to keep Roloff's grief from knocking on their doors. For always, in the distance, came the faintest sound, the squeak of wood rocking on unseen waves. And those who heard it knew, the drowned were not done. Coffin. End of part 8. Do you want part 9 1000 words to push toward the climax, where the cradle makes a terrifying full return, threatening to claim an entire community, or should it keep building more lore with scattered hauntings before the final confrontation? Perfect. Here's part 9, approximately 1000 words, of the horror saga. This part pushes toward the climax. The cradle no longer haunts in fragments, but returns with terrible force, threatening not only a single soul but an entire community. Part 9. The night the cradle returned. By the early 2000s, Cayuga's legends had grown into a sideshow. The cradle was mentioned on ghost tours, turned into Halloween attractions, and even printed on novelty t-shirts. Roloff rocks babies to death. One tourist shop proclaimed, as though grief and drowning were fit for jokes. The locals despised it. They knew the truth had teeth. The first sign. In November of 2003, a low mist settled across Lansing for 3 nights straight. It clung to the cornfields, the roads, the porches of homes, never burning away with the sun. People said the mist smelled faintly of algae and rot. On the 3rd night, children playing by the shore came running, pale and stammering. They had heard it, a lullaby drifting from the lake, soft as a mother's hum. And on the waves, something rocked, though the water was still. The barn gathering. That same week, a family on Ludlow Road awoke to the sound of wood creaking. At first they thought a shutter had come loose in the wind. But the sound repeated, steady, rhythmic, creak, creak, creak. They followed it to the barn. There it stood. The cradle was larger now, as though swollen by the years. Its wood glistened black with wet. Moss and weeds clung to its joints. It rocked violently on the straw, though no hand touched it. Water pooled beneath, flooding outward, soaking the hay until the air stank of rot. And within it, something moved. The family swore later they saw an infant, slick with water, gasping soundlessly. Then it sank beneath the sodden blankets, and in its place a pale woman sat upright, hair plastered to her face, lips moving in lullaby. Her eyes rolled upward, white and blind. The family fled the barn screaming. By dawn, the cradle was gone, but the barn floor remained wet for weeks, as though the lake itself had seeped into its boards. The skeptics. Trap. Word spread fast. Teenagers dared each other to seek it out, while ghost hunters from Syracuse arrived with cameras and equipment. They camped by the ruins of the shut homestead, determined to lure the cradle. They brought candles, salt, holy water. They recited chants, mocked the legend, shouted Roloff's name into the night air. At midnight, the wind dropped. The candles went out. From the tree line came the sound of rocking. Slowly, the cradle emerged from the shadows. No one carried it. No wheels rolled beneath. It simply slid forward across the leaves, dripping lake water. One skeptic approached, laughing, and touched it with his boot. The cradle rocked. The ground beneath him softened into muck, sucking at his legs. He fell screaming, sinking into earth as if it were water. His companions tried to pull him free, but their hands passed through, touching only froth and bubbles where he had stood. When the rocking stopped, he was gone. The cradle was empty again. The ghost hunters fled, abandoning their equipment. When townsfolk searched the next day, they found only the cameras, waterlogged, ruined, though no rain had fallen. The town meeting. By December, the town of Lansing was in uproar. Rumors flew. Livestock found drowned in troughs. Children waking soaked in their beds though no leak existed. Lullabies whispered through heating vents at night. The town called a meeting at the church. Dozens packed the pews, faces pale, whispering. Some demanded prayer. Others spoke of burning the cradle, if it appeared. A few insisted it was hysteria. An old woman, Margaret Ellis, the last of the ferryman's line, rose to speak. Her voice shook, but her words silenced the crowd. You cannot burn what grief keeps alive, she said. You cannot bury what guilt digs up. The cradle comes because it is called, by mockery, by laughter, by remembrance. And now it comes for all of us. Her eyes swept the hall. If it rocks in your home, do not touch it. Do not speak to it. Do not peer within, because what rocks there waits to rock you too. Few believed her. Fewer wanted to. The Christmas Eve storm. On Christmas Eve, 2003, the storm rolled in. Snow fell heavy, winds howled. Families huddled inside, fires blazing, lights flickering. And through the gale came a sound. Creak, creak, creak. The rocking carried from every direction. Some heard it in attics, others in basements, others through the pipes in their walls. Mothers swore they heard lullabies by their children's cribs. Dogs howled, cats fled under beds. Then the power failed. The town fell black. Families lit candles, only to see, in every flicker of light, the shadow of a cradle rocking, though no cradle stood there. The procession. Down Ludlow Road, neighbors peeked from windows to see figures moving through the storm. At first they thought them townsfolk braving the blizzard. But no footprints marked their passing. The figures carried nothing, yet between them, suspended in air, rocked the cradle. Within it lay shadows that shifted. An infant, a drowned woman, a weeping man, then all three together, tangled like reeds. House by house, the procession passed, and with it the sound of waves though no water lay near. Children fell into sudden sleep, unshakable. Windows iced over from within. And always, the rocking, creak, 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 like the heartbeat of the storm. The lake awakens. The procession led to the lake. By midnight, dozens claimed to see it. The cradle rocking on the frozen surface, ice cracking beneath. Figures circled it, wailing, a ferryman, a drowned wife, countless nameless souls dragged from the depths of grief. The ice shattered. The lake opened. Water frothed and surged though the storm had stilled. The cradle sank into the dark. And with it, the voices wailed one last time, before silence returned. The morning after. When morning broke, the storm was gone. But Lansing was not the same. 3 houses stood empty, doors ajar, fires burned to ash, food half-eaten at tables. The families within had vanished. Only damp blankets remained on the beds, and faint indentations in the shape of a cradle by each hearth. No one spoke openly of it. But in hushed tones, they admitted, the cradle had come, and it had claimed its tithe. The warning. Margaret Ellis died a week later, found in her chair by the window, staring toward the lake. On her lap lay a note in trembling script. It will come again, when grief is mocked, when guilt is fed, when children are left to cry unheard. The cradle will find them. And it will rock until the living join the drowned. Her family burned the note. But the rocking never truly stopped. Even now, on stormy nights, neighbors swear they hear it, drifting from barns, from fields, from the black water of Cayuga itself. Creak, creak, creak. The sound of a grief that never sleeps. Coffin. End of part 9. Do you want part 10 final, 1,000 words to deliver a full climax, where the cradle no longer haunts shadows but rises as an inescapable curse threatening anyone who remembers the story, and then end with a chilling call to action for readers? Subscribe, share, comment. Part 10. The cradle's last rocking. The winter after the storm, Lansing tried to return to normal. Shops reopened, children trudged back to school, farmers plowed fields now hardened with frost. People told themselves the storm had been nothing more than nature's fury, that families must have fled in panic, that old women's warnings were just superstition. But silence never lasts in a haunted place. A new haunting. By February, it began again. Not with rocking or lullabies this time, but with dreams. Entire households reported the same nightmare. A cradle, black and dripping, stood at the foot of their beds. It rocked without sound, without touch. When they peered into it, they saw themselves, not as they were, but as corpses, bloated and pale, hair drifting in unseen water. The cradle rocked faster. The dreamer could not wake until they felt cold hands seize their ankles, pulling them down, pulling them beneath the blankets, beneath the mattress, into the black water below. Families began sleeping with lights on, rosaries under pillows, televisions running all night. But the dreams continued. Some stopped sleeping altogether, eyes sunken, nerves frayed. A few disappeared from their homes in the night, beds still warm. The historian returns. Dr. Everett, the historian who had once catalogued the Cradle's appearances, returned to Lansing after 20 years. His hair was gray now, his hands unsteady, but he came with boxes of old files, determined to prove what the town already feared: the Cradle was not bound to a place. It followed memory. Every community that had spoken of it, written of it, turned it into legend had eventually been visited. First the dreams, then the rocking, then the vanishings. It does not want remembrance, Everett told the gathered few at the library. It wants silence. It wants grief swallowed, unspoken. But we have fed it with stories, with mockery, with fear. And now it is not content with one lake, one village. It wants us all. Some called him mad, but most believed him, for outside, through the library's frosted windows, they could all hear it. Creak, creak, creak. The rocking of something no one had touched. The last gathering. March came, and with it, resignation. The town gathered at the lake once more, as their grandparents had in ages past. They hoped to banish it, to cast it out. Priests came with holy water. Wiccans came with salt and charms. Skeptics came with cameras. Mothers came clutching their children. At midnight, the water stirred. The Cradle rose from the depths, larger than ever before. Its frame stretched tall as a man, its wood warped into grotesque shapes, like ribs and spines. Water gushed from it as though it contained the lake itself. Inside it lay no infant, no woman, no ferryman, only a mirror of every face on the shore. Each townsfolk saw themselves cradled within, rocking toward death. The priests prayed. The witches chanted. The skeptics wept. None of it mattered. The Cradle rocked. The ground trembled. Houses on the hill shook loose from their foundations. Lights across the valley blinked out. And then, with a sound like splitting timber, the Cradle tipped forward. The lake did not swallow it. It spilled out. Water surged across the fields, through streets, into homes, black as ink. Figures floated within, every drowned soul it had ever claimed, stretching pale hands toward the living. The town screamed as one. The breaking. Dr. Everett shouted above the roar, "Do not fight it. Do not look within." But his warning was lost in the flood. He himself vanished beneath the wave, his papers scattering across the water, ink smearing into nothing. One by one, the townsfolk were pulled down. Some into the lake, some into their own beds, some into the earth itself as it softened like wet clay. Wherever grief lay, the Cradle found them. The water did not stop at Lansing. Witnesses swore it poured into neighboring towns, seeping through drains, flooding dreams, filling cradles that had sat empty for decades. The more people spoke of it, the farther it traveled. By April, reports came from across New York. Lullabies in the night, rocking in abandoned barns, children waking with water in their lungs. By June, whispers spread across the country. The Cradle was loose. The last warning. The final testimony came from a girl named Hannah, who survived the flood by locking herself in a church belfry as the water rose. She watched the town vanish, house by house, light by light. She heard lullabies echo across the hills, hundreds of voices singing in unison, mothers and fathers and children long dead. When rescuers found her, she was half-starved, trembling, and blind. The last words she wrote before succumbing to fever were these: "The Cradle is not wood. It is not water. It is grief itself. It rocks wherever sorrow is told and retold. If you whisper its story, it comes. If you laugh at its tale, it comes. If you read these words, it comes. And now, if you have read this far, you have already felt it. The lullaby in your walls, the creak on your stairs, the shadow at the foot of your bed, it may not be tonight, or tomorrow, but it will come. And when it rocks, you must not look inside. Because what it cradles will be you. Creak, creak, creak. The sound you hear when silence grows too deep. The sound of your own grief waiting to be claimed. Dash dash dash. Coffin the end coffin. Dash dash dash. Loudspeaker call to action. If this story chilled you to the bone, don't keep it to yourself. Right finger subscribe to follow more haunting tales. Right finger share this story so others can feel the cradles rocking. Right finger comment your thoughts, if you dare. Because the more it is spoken of, the closer it comes.